right. Welcome to Setting the Bar, a podcast by Workbar. I'm Maddie.
I'm Sarah.
And we are here with a dear friend of the show, Vince Pan from Analog Studio.
I feel like it's not even a guest. Like, we didn't really have to do any preparation.
We sure didn't.
Because Vince is basically part of Workbar.
Yeah.
But not really.
I mean, if you look at any Workbar, Vince's touch is there.
He does. So let's get into who Vince is.
Yeah, the people want to know.
The people want to know.
Say more about that, Maddie. What do you mean?
Vince started Analog Studio a little after Workbar was founded, so 2011. And Vince, tell us a little bit about Analog Studio to start, and then we'll go back into your background
and why you're part of the Workbar family.
Yeah, and why you're part of the Workbar family. But tell us a little bit about what led you to found Analog here in Boston Podcast in 2011.
I'd always wanted to found my own architecture studio, and I had a strong belief in the value of interdisciplinary design, so combining architecture, interior design, and branding. And I'd worked for several firms around Boston and didn't find that anywhere here. I kept looking, and then said to myself, well, maybe it's time for me to do that.
Yeah.
And then in the winter of 2010, I had two separate former clients reach out and say, hey, what are you doing these days? Like, would you be willing to take on a project independently? And I had been thinking about leaving my previous role to start something, and I said, well, this is about as good as the timing is ever going to get.
Right.
Somebody coming with projects, didn't have mortgage, no kids. So
the good old days.
The good old days, yes.
That's very different now.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
So.
And that was in Boston, because you're not from Boston. You didn't start your career in Boston. You're from Florida.
Correct.
Which I was
I
just
didn't know
reminded.
you were from
yes,
Florida.
I know.
Florida man. Yeah.
Where from Florida? Where in Florida?
Tallahassee, Florida, which is North Florida.
Interesting. When I think of Tallahassee, I don't think Florida. I feel like it's more of those like just western from their states vibes in Tallahassee.
It's more southern Georgia than it is what most people think of Florida. I like to say there's three Floridas.
Okay.
There's North Florida. There's Central Florida, which is just weird and lovely.
Yeah, the Everglades.
It's my favorite Florida. And there's South Florida, which is Miami and international and not really like,
It's actually very true. Yeah. Anyway, so Vince is from Florida. Sorry.
So Vince is from Florida. What brought you to Boston?
Well, first I was working in New York after grad school, and then I came up here for what I thought would be a short time. The partner I had at the time was up here, and I was like, okay, she's going to finish grad school. I'll go up there and hang out for a little bit.
The classic move for a girl story.
Yeah, and then moved back to New York, and that was in 2003.
So you never moved back.
I never moved back.
Yeah.
I loved it. I fell in love with it. And, got tired of living in New York and all those things. And, the ecosystem here is really strong for architects. There's a lot of young people and a lot of talent. And it was just a nice balance of like big city but still manageable. Right.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot because the Workbar podcast is, I think, one of the only podcasts that is hosted by people in the co-working industry, but it's not about co-working, it's about Boston.
Right.
And what makes businesses in Boston successful and able to thrive. And Analog Studio does a lot of work for the startup community. You have some Mass Challenge history in your background. You guys have a lot of education background. You've done work at Northeastern, hospitality. There are some really beautiful restaurants around here that have the Analog stamp on them. I think one of them was just named one of the 50 most beautiful restaurants in the entire country.
That is crazy.
People Magazine.
By People Magazine, which if anybody knows Sarah Travers, they know what Sarah loves. People Magazine.
That is.
That's like kind of my Bible.
Yeah. Okay, say that again, Vince. Tell the people what award you won for what design.
So our client, Wusong Road, won 50 most beautiful restaurants in the country from People Magazine.
That is really cool and amazing.
By proxy us.
By proxy you, because you're the designer, the architect and designer. That's a restaurant in Cambridge?
It is. It's in Harvard Square. It's in an old... It's called the Conductors Building. It was the old building where the train conductors used to sort of operate. And right outside is where the train tracks used to be. So if you go there, it's where the MBTA buses go in and out of now.
That's really
But it's a little tiny sliver of building. It's like 20 feet wide maybe by like 80 feet long.
Wow.
And it's small, but it's really beautiful and quaint. And
we have to check that out.
Yeah.
Field trip.
I know. What I love, whenever I say a building to Vince knows the building. And like we were talking about a building last week in Cambridge, and you were like, isn't that the old twine building?
Oh my
and
God, that's right.
It's really long because they used to roll twine. So you're like, it's fun to work and see so many spaces and places in Boston because there's just so much very cool history about the buildings that we go into.
We need a crossover episode with you and Scott Kersner from the Globe.
Who Vince knows Scott.
Oh yeah, okay. And if that would be a cool.
It would be.
We could play trivia.
We could. Oh
my God.
Maddie and I
totally
failed at it.
Killed me in that. Yeah. He's a journalist.
He is.
Yeah. But he
professionally knowing it.
This is true, Vince.
Okay, fair. I just think that's so cool. And people read that in People magazine and are like, oh, cool, analog studio, some architecture firm. But it's cool that it's a little architecture firm in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And
it's not so little. Vince does work in New York.
I was thinking more like little, like size-wise.
Oh, yeah.
Architectural footprint. Like you drive by analog when you're just like heading into Cambridge. And I think that's really cool. And, you said a minute ago about the ecosystem for architects in Boston. And it's so funny because every episode we've had, every person we've interviewed has said something similar about their industry, and it really just speaks to why we do this podcast, which is Boston is the best place to grow a business, and it can be interdisciplinary architecture and design, and also biotech, and also healthcare. Right. It's cool.
Right, it is. Yeah, we're jumping around a lot on this, but
sorry.
We decided to do the Boston part of our conversation in the beginning of our podcast this time around, but. Tell us a little bit about Boston's architecture scene. You just touched on the talent that was here and sort of the young people and the innovation. You've done so much work for, we talked about, education, hospitality, the startup ecosystem. Tell us a little bit about how that all came to be and how maybe from where you worked prior to Analog, prior to founding your studio to what your vision was and how you choose projects.
So to go back to what Maddie was saying, when there came a time when I was thinking about, I was about to get married and we were thinking about, okay, do we settle in Boston where I lived or in New York where my wife was at the time? And the deciding factor was really where could I start a business more viably? And
so you knew very early on that you wanted to start your own business then.
Yeah. So funny enough, the business plan for Analog Studio I wrote when I was in grad school,
That's cool.
and I had the name. It was called Analog Studio.
Really?
Wow.
And so that would have been in 2001.
Wow.
And so. I had already developed it. That was I'd been here 5-6 years. I'd already developed a good professional network here. It was very supportive, right? There were always people willing to help out, willing to pitch in. Even, when I was doing my work with a different firm, always wanting to help support me or support our firm and our clients. So it just felt much less cutthroat than being in New York and much less much easier and simpler to get off the ground, right? New York is it's so competitive there. There's so many people there, so many talented architects there, and just breaking into a community there is much more difficult. Here, it felt it took me a solid 2 years to really fit in to the architecture community here because it is also a little bit insular, or it was. I think that's different now. But then once I think it's a very New England sort of Puritan mindset, once you're into the network and once you're and you feel like a local, then people are very, very warm and embracing.
Right.
So.
Yeah, we always say that Boston takes care of people from Boston.
Yeah.
But there's a threshold when you get to say you're from Boston.
Right. No, coming from Florida, that sort of took Maddie and I a step back, and we'll look at your membership.
Yeah.
I know exactly. Maybe
we'll
this might get
discuss
cut.
this after this recording. He will never design a Workbar again.
Yeah, but Analog's had so many accolades over the year, 50 on Fire from Boston Inno, top 50 U.S. firms from Architect Magazine, Boston Best Businesses. You yourself have won I'm going to not say this name right, but an award from Boston Society of Architects. So your work certainly hasn't gone unnoticed, and your firm, you've been able to sort of catapult yourself to a certain amount of success in Boston and beyond. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why you became an architect and what were your earlier, what sort of inspired you to go into this field?
One thing I actually wanted to get back to real quick that you mentioned earlier is that we pride ourselves on being a Boston-based company.
Right.
We really enjoy working with local companies like Workbar and HealthWorks that have like major footprints but are still local or regional, right? It's really important to us. A lot of the work that we've done that brought us to, say, California, New York, Canada, Jamaica, we've done projects.
Jamaica?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
We did a resort in Jamaica.
Do you need an assistant on that project? Or?
I could project manage that.
I know a gal.
Yeah.
But they're all based for Boston-based clients, right? So we're not like trying to be flying all over the place, but there's people who appreciate our work here and that appreciate the relationships here and have asked us to go elsewhere. So it means a lot to us to work with Boston companies and to like be a part of the community. So
anybody who I say who our architect, who designs our spaces and who our architect is, they all know you.
That's cool.
They
That's good.
do. It's all, oh, I know. I'll say Analog Studio, and they'll say, oh, Vince Pan. And I'm like, yeah, how do you know? And it's so...
Okay, hotshot.
Even without the social media.
Yeah, even without Maddie as your social media.
Okay. This crack team.
But it is, I do love that about Boston because I do, like we do always go back to, it's a big city, obviously, but it has such a small hometown feeling here. And I do think that people who run businesses in Boston are supportive of one another.
Yeah.
And you guys are known for having long-lasting relationships and having, just being able to foster like goodwill and again, it goes back to sort of you guys would never be the type of firm you would call to have like one job and done and walk away from.
Right,
I think
build
that
a cool office building by.
Yeah. Like I think that most of whether your clients want you to do work, beyond Boston or when their lease renewal comes up or when they're designing a new restaurant or you guys are so focused on the relationships that you build with your clients that I think that really sets you guys apart as one of your clients.
From a client perspective. Yeah. No, I agree with that.
You had asked earlier how we go about selecting our clients. And the things that I've always told everybody on my team is that we will select and prefer to work with a great client over a great project any day of the week.
Yeah,
like, even if it's the most spectacular project, if it's not a great group of people, it's not going to be fun. There's no way to make that fun. It can be miserable still.
Right.
But we can be working on the most straightforward, mundane project with a great group of people, and it's enjoyable. And like that makes a difference. That's the way I view what we do. There are others that, that focus on pretty pictures at the end of the project or those things, which we also care about. But like it's about having a day-to-day like good experience when you pick up the phone and talk to your colleagues and clients. So that's a big factor in how we choose who we work with and who we develop relationships with. We often start a relationship, like you said, with one project, and then very often it grows into other things, right? And that's where we've been really fortunate. Most of our clients have been with us for a decade or more, and we've only been around for 14 years now. So
that's
really cool.
Yeah,
it's really nice. Like, and it's we get to know the businesses better. We get to be like plugged in and intertwined, just like we are with Workbar, and it helps us do better work, right? Because we know like the business from so many different angles, not just from the architecture or from the interiors, but from a brand standpoint, from a business standpoint, from a personality standpoint. So,
well, that's so funny because, and it sort of clicks in the back of my brain. Not even when I first became CEO of Workbar, but probably a few years in, and even now, whenever anybody wants to change anything, whether it's like colors on our website or when we were coming up with a new tagline, I always bring Analog Studio in because
so true.
If I think of myself as the brand police, but second to me is 100% Analog Studio.
For sure.
I just do. Like nobody knows Workbar as well as Analog, and it's not the architecture. I mean, obviously it is because you're an architect, but I think of you guys as somebody who cares about my brand as much as I do.
No, I agree with that. I was just about to say that, like, I was introduced to you and your team within like the first 2 weeks of me starting working here. It was like very clear that I'm, you know, on the marketing team, and so I'm responsible for branding, but the people who are like in charge, the buck stops with you and Analog.
Yes.
And it was so cool to be in those meetings and to see branding from a different lens. I've been in branding for most of my career, but never worked with an architecture design firm.
Right.
And it's really cool. It's a different side of things. And you can see it in all of the spaces. You can see the evolution of the relationship. You can see the evolution of the brand from some of our earlier locations to the ones now.
Right.
And it really, we rely on that.
We rely on that. And it's, I think when we were originally talking about, maybe 18 months ago, talking about changing our website, and I said, well, you can't just change the colors because they match like the colors in our space, and you have to go to Analog and they have to tell you what to do.
No, you guys were a big part of that project at the beginning. Yeah, it's cool. I mean, from a client perspective, but also a brand professional perspective, I think it is a really cool process. It really like enriches the brand, I think.
And I guess we're probably, even though I like to say we're Analog's only clients, I'm guessing you do that for more people than just us.
Just a few. If you select
keep the
roster.
lights on.
So, but no, we like to think of ourselves as stewards of our clients' brands, right?
Yeah, that's
you
cool.
know, not necessarily dictating things because that's a collaborative process, but like we really try to take good care of them and nurture them and build them over time. You know, if I think back to when Workbar first started and when we started working in Cambridge and where the brand was there to where it is now, it's been so rewarding to have a hand in watching it mature and help moving it into like the new website and the new locations. So
so fun.
You know, it's a lot of this perspective is comes from really early on. Like one of the reasons I started architecture school was because I always thought like, well, I like art and I like math, so like, why not architecture? That combines those things.
Right.
And like many misconceptions about architecture school, that was wrong.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. So it wasn't art and math. What was it?
It was design, and it was space planning, not planning, really sort of designing of space and spatial thinking and really abstract thinking. And it was completely not what I expected from the very first day of architecture school. But I was really fortunate to have a great professor for my first studio class.
That's awesome.
Freshman year of college, and really lucky to go to a school that happened to have a good architecture program, which I didn't really know. Like when I went there, I knew I was like, oh, I want to go to architecture school. University of Florida has an architecture school. I'll just go there, and because I live in Florida.
Right.
And but turns out they have a really solid one, which is great.
Cool.
And luckily enough, it worked out. Like I still liked what I was doing there, even though it wasn't exactly what I thought it would be.
Right.
So much more abstract. Like the math part, all that stuff that comes in much later, and it's much less central. Like I had worked in construction in high school, and I expected to be much more technical like that.
Yeah, I would too.
Not at all.
Like if somebody said, like, what do you think architecture school is like? I would be like, ooh, not for me. Too many like spreadsheets and numbers.
I would think so too.
Geometry.
Not so. There's maybe a little bit of that's a whole nother podcast. Like some problems with that in architecture school. That there's maybe not enough of like outside of just design that goes into being an architect. But yeah, no, the school right now is dominated by just really design studio and project design.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, I mean, another thing you can see in our spaces, and a lot of the architecture around Boston is kind of the progression of that. It's getting much less traditional across the city, which is crazy to see if you've lived here your whole life. But for you, it's probably just like, wow, cool. Like these things are all happening.
Well, it's funny, when I was, again, at that same moment when I was trying to decide whether to live here or New York, I was like, Boston's changing a little bit. Because even when I had been here 5-6 years, it was still, a lot of the work was very, very like conservative. Not just new buildings, but also interiors and other things. And then it started to open up a little bit more and a little bit more. So it's been really nice to see, like, you know, how much more like adventurous the city's gotten
Yeah.
in terms of design, and like the level is higher than it was when I was starting the firm.
That's
So,
cool.
What do you
Yeah, well,
think
this-
of?
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Were
I
you
was
going to
just
say the
gonna say
seaport? Oh my
seaport,
gosh.
yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I was going to say, like,
Yes.
talk about the seaport because
Because
I
it
think
gets people
I
say that
think-
it's just like glass boxes and it's so boring, right?
people do say that. I think, yeah, people say it's glass boxes, it's boring, it's not Boston enough, it's like
Yeah.
sterile, you could be in any city.
Right.
Which to some degree I agree with. But again, I think it's because when I grew up here, so when I was little, it was like mostly parking lots.
Mud lots. I
right.
parked there for years.
Right. So
$5 a day.
I think to see it pop up, it feels like it popped up. Obviously, it's been
Right.
a long time.
Right.
But it felt at first very like, oh my God, how could you do this to our
Right.
beautiful city? But I still really like it, and I think it's good for Boston. We can't just be like brick row houses and concrete squares for the rest of our lives.
I think the Seaport is home to some of the worst new buildings in Boston, but also some
Hot
of the
take,
best.
hot take.
Some of the best as well.
Okay,
So
name names.
Yeah.
You know, I also part of what I think makes the Seaport successful is 4-Point Channel right next to it, right?
Yeah.
That you have like that flow between. What is that? Either side of Seaport Boulevard, right? On one side, you have all the old brick and beam buildings, the
Right.
old warehouses right there, and
Yep.
then all the new stuff is right there. And they're pretty seamlessly interconnected. There's like Trader Joe's on one side, and then that flows into like
Right.
the new stuff. So, and you're not that far away from anything historic either. You're not that far from
Right.
Southie. You're not that far. You can see the airport. You can
Right.
see
That
downtown.
old
The
logo.
courthouse is right there, which is not that old, but
Right.
older. So I think it works in that way.
Yeah.
A lot of the buildings are just big glass boxes, but there's a few of the newer ones that are pretty good. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I don't remember the addresses though. Like,
Sure.
Yeah.
because they don't have names yet.
They're all buildings are branded now. So
But a lot of the ones in
yeah.
Seaport aren't.
Yeah.
They're just
No,
121
they're- yeah.
Seaport Boulevard.
Right,
Yeah.
True.
Seaport Boulevard,
Yeah.
like One Marina Park Drive, and
Yeah.
Right.
I saw
it's
on the Globe
interesting.
today they're demolishing the Northern Avenue Bridge. Did you see
Really?
that?
No.
I know. It's
That's sad.
It's sad.
That's the little footbridge, right?
It is.
The one that like spins.
Yeah, but I don't think it's been open for a few years, but yeah.
Oh.
More
I
than
remember
probably
riding
a
my
few.
bike across
I do
that,
too.
like,
I
when,
remember walking
like-
there every day
Yeah.
from the mud lots.
Yeah, I mean, those are for sure the things that make. It's not gentrification. Boston's been gentrified, but I
Yeah,
can't think of the
but-
word. It's
right.
just like the. It just, I don't ever want Boston to become like a city like. I mean, New York City has a lot of character, but it's like that's just New York City. I'm trying to think. Like,
you
I
want to
want
know.
be-
It's like a work bar. You want to know what work bar you're in when you're in it.
Exactly.
You don't want it to be
that personality.
Yeah,
Or like
yeah.
Charlotte, North Carolina, which is like great city, blah, but like there's no character.
I don't think that's gonna happen though, because
I hope
Bostonians are
not.
too like
Yeah.
I know.
curmudgeonly.
We'll be,
and,
like, knocking down glass
unwelcoming,
buildings.
and like
Yeah.
all the charming things that like as after having been here for a long time you can find charming. Like I
Yeah.
don't think
That's fair.
I don't think
no.
they'll let that happen. Right?
Stay strong, fam.
It's like
Yeah, fam.
there's
Don't
always
let 'em
gonna
in
be
Boston.
lawn chairs. In
Yeah.
You're
Southie,
right.
And
Yep.
So-
Street savers and yeah.
Oh my God. So
I mean,
true. So true.
That's good. That would take generations, right?
I know.
You're
So-
right, Vince.
If I still lived in the city, I would be raising my kids to safe spots. So I think if
They
you're
would be
raising
out there.
kids in the
They would
city,
be
yeah,
stuck.
they're the spot saver.
Yeah.
Wow, I never thought of that before.
I have a picture of Annabelle back in the snowstorm. It must have been in like 14 or 15 when we got
15.
Yeah, a lot of heat. And she was a baby, and we lived in Southie, and somebody had put a lawn chair out, and I put her in it, and I said, "You stay here and guard
Yeah.
the spot." And I put a picture like on Facebook or something back then, and I was like, "Oh, Southie Street." A spot saver, and people were like, "You're leaving your kid out there, save him."
You're like, yeah.
calm down, people.
It's just a photo op.
Of course.
Yeah, just a photo op.
I know. We're joking.
We're
being-
joking.
We do not have a sense of humor in the middle of winter.
No.
It's hard.
The three of us were recently talking about the evolution of work bars, and we sort of had, and we are talking about Facebook because, as you say, Analog came on back in 2013 and designed the first location you guys designed was Workbar Cambridge. And one of our has become sort of an anecdotal famous story at Workbar is that Facebook was a member company at Workbar Cambridge.
Not to brag.
Yeah.
Not to brag, but they wanted to stay at Workbar Cambridge. But back then, Workbar was really open co-working, which we still obviously are. That's a huge differentiator for us, but we just had small offices. So a few years later, and sort of in between that timeline and when we opened up our Burlington location, one of the changes that we made was to have sort of these larger team suites for companies, because as we all know, once you become a Workbar member, you never want to leave.
It's true.
And you want to continue to grow and grow and grow until we don't want you there anymore because you're too big.
Oh, bye.
Yeah, so talking like a little bit about Analog Studios' integral part in sort of the Workbar evolution, and sort of one thing that sticks out in my brain as well was it was your vision that Workbar Back Bay, back in 2016, 17, become the first co-working space in the world to achieve WELL certification. And as a reminder to all of our listeners, WELL certification wasn't really a thing back then. It was pre-pandemic. People weren't that interested in the built environment being a healthy environment, and they didn't understand the benefits of things you can't see, like refreshed air and all that kind of good stuff. But what was your vision back then to propose that Workbar try to achieve this? Because back then it wasn't easy.
Yeah, as I started to learn about the WELL standard, the first thing I thought was like, this just makes total sense for Workbar.
Right.
Like the same, ethos of care about human beings and people and members is what drove WELL and what made it instantly align with Workbar. So as we researched it more, we looked into, well, how achievable is this? Is this going to be a huge cost? Is there a big burden? And we found a way, especially with Back Bay, to make it manageable. But, the WELL standard centers on, I'm going to get this wrong, 7 different categories: air, water, light, nourishment, beauty, and mindset, I think is one.
Just reminded me of Captain Planet.
Yeah, exactly.
Air.
Yeah.
And there's one more somewhere.
I'm picturing the...
Yeah.
But, actually, this part of what drove me there was also thinking about Workbar as a brand and understanding that, from a brand standpoint, we always talk about it being member-centered and people-centered and human-centered, not just wanting to have lots of members or wanting to have certain types of members, but it was just about really the people and the individuals working there and in a real care for them. And so we thought, what better way to demonstrate that than to help take physical care of the people that were in your spaces, and also to level up and have a competitive advantage over any other co-working space. And there weren't even that many office spaces at that point that had done WELL certification. So we looked into it and then made a pitch to Bill and Richard and Simon, I think, back then, and pushed hard for it. And it went back and forth a little bit. We had to do some cost modeling, and ultimately they decided to go for it. And I think it was great. It was good education for everybody. And all those principles still apply to every Workbar since then.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool because we always say how Workbar is on the leading edge of co-working and defining co-working and, what work-life combination, combining your work and life versus trying to balance it, what it can really do for you. And that is a pretty common notion now, but like you said before, it wasn't back then. And I think it really speaks to how Workbar has been on the leading edge of co-working and the industry just from the beginning. And you've shepherded that through now to 2025 when it's like a little old hat.
Yeah.
But we're like, we're still the only WELL certified co-working space. So I think that will change. Oh.
I will tell you. So we actually looked at this the other day when I was looking at your renewal.
Now?
There's no. I think there's one other in the U.S. maybe, but there's some internationally. But even still, there's 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
and
still
it's much easier to achieve it now than it was back when we did it.
They've definitely
They've made it.
They've lowered the bar.
They've lowered the bar. They've
The
lowered
standards
the bar.
have been lowered.
They will not be on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will not invite them.
No.
No, but even still, that is still crazy. Like, you would think it would be kind of 101 at this point. Like, we know it's not a hot idea. It's not like a new idea that workplace wellness is legitimately so important for physical and mental health.
Right. Well, Vince, like along those lines, when I think about workplace wellness, a lot of it's like invisible, right? You know, the lighting that mirrors your circadian rhythm, the refreshed oxygen, the organic patterns that happen in nature, happening in the space. And I know I personally, and I'm not an architect or a designer, but I know I personally get so frustrated when I hear people talking about return to office, have like a dog shampoo station, have like a manicurist, have all this like dumb stuff that they think will drive people back to work. And I'm like, just make the space, make people happy and healthy within the space.
Right. The extras don't matter. You just want to be able to do your job well and feel good while you're doing it. Like,
right. And those are like the sort of the things that maybe like a landlord or a broker wants to showcase on a tour to try to get some sort of decision maker who knows where they live. They're not the ones who are actually coming into the office, but they think, okay, check the box.
Right.
When we focus on more elements that you can't see, you can't feel, you can't really tell. You can see obviously like organic patterns and everything, but you can't touch. But I know I personally get very frustrated and I like shut down a little bit on those conversations. What frustrates you out in the world of like space right now and work and design?
Well, I think it's a lot of it is that like we're just a blind rush to build amenities that may make for good photos, may make for good brochures, but aren't driven by any sort of cultural basis or sort of human-mindedness, right?
Yeah.
So when we're approached by clients to talk about amenities and what should we add, it's a lot of times we're going to drive the conversation back to culture and like, well, how do you guys work? Why would people come into the office? Right. What is happening that it supports that? What's not happening? What would you want people to come in for? And then we figure out the spaces that would support that, right? Rather than saying, okay, if only we had a gym, then everybody would come in, because that's not really true, right?
Right.
So it's really about building, I think, a workflow and a choreography at work that rewards being in the office, rather than, again, just having sort of generalized amenities. But,
yes.
So that's incredibly frustrating, right? When that care to the sort of work culture, company culture hasn't been given, and we're being asked to do something that just, again, is about show.
Right. A pizza party.
So,
right.
It could be, yeah.
Pizza Fridays.
Yeah. Thanks. I feel all better.
Yeah. The same thing goes for design, right? Like, oh, I saw a design that looks like this. I just want something that looks like that because that looks cool. And it's like, well, that's not really part of your brand. That doesn't fit like with who you guys say you are. That doesn't like it's not gonna work. It's not gonna click, even if it looks cool. If it's you have a certain ethos and this is communicating something differently, then it's never gonna feel at home, right? That's why we approach things the way we do. Is like we understand what makes an organization tick, just like the way we try to understand what makes people tick, and then design for that. Because no two are the same, and so no two designs really should be the same or
so true,
similar. So
my mind is a little blown right now because we always say how like no two workers are the same, and what is so great about Workbar is that it really does work for every kind of person. Like you can be an ADHD girly like me, or like super type A and heads down, and you can find success at Workbar. And we always say that, but it's like legit true. So it's cool to hear you say that from the architectural lens, because that's exactly what you did in Workbar. So I'm a little like, wow.
But all those things go hand in hand, right? It's like so the whole concept of the neighborhoods started back when we did Cambridge, and came from observations at 7-Eleven that certain people like to work in certain areas, and we tried to figure out, okay, why? What's the difference of those areas? Like, why does some group choose to work on this side versus that side? If you remember 7-Eleven, it's a really idiosyncratic space.
We're talking about 7-Eleven Atlantic Avenue, not 7-Eleven.
Yeah,
Sarah
7-Eleven
did not used to own convenience stores.
Yeah.
Workbar South Station.
Right.
And you know, a lot of those work habits there had grown up organically over the years. And when we went in, we tried to understand, okay, well, why are different teams choosing different spots and different people are choosing different spots? And eventually that led to, okay, well, there's certain types of people that like to work in certain areas. And then the whole concept of the neighborhoods emanated from that. So looking for people who wanted the feeling of a cafe and bustling and like something vibrant, a lot of in and out. The study where some people want like to just shut everything out and keep heads down. The commons for groups that needed to be talking a lot to one another and needed to collaborate. And then the switchboard with people who were talking a lot but outbound. And each of those has a different personality and has different tools to support that personality type. And you know, some people just work in one all day long. Some people bounce around from one to the next. I often bounce around when I'm at Workbar. Between, you know, depending on what's happening in my day. But yeah, that's all driven from the real people that were using Workbar 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's so cool because there are not a lot of brands. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm sure there are a lot of brands. It's hard to think of a brand off the top of my head that really walks the walk and talks the talk and walks the walk as much as Workbar does. We talk about it all the time, but we work out of the spaces the same way the members do, from CEO to CM, and you designed it to be that way and use it that way. It is so, I can't think of the word. I just think it's really special part of our brand. Like, we say what we do and we do what we say.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what makes you great operators, right? To understand like the needs of a business like yours or somebody like yours, and be able to bring that to life. You know, we've, I think, now had 3 stints in Workbar.
You have. Yep. Where
One longer than expected,
Yeah.
where the whole team has worked there, and it's been great. And it teaches us something every single time, right?
Right.
We go there, it's good.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I know. I love
it.
seeing the analog folks come into Workbar and hang out and work. It's really, I love it.
Yeah.
And I think it's so interesting, the aspect of like building the space around. We almost had like 7-Eleven Atlantic Ave was like a prototype. It was like an experiment to see how people would work when they're together. Because a lot of common misconceptions about co-working space is like, oh, well, I can't use a phone, or there's no place to get like heads down quiet if I need to like read medical journals all day. And it's like, well, actually, there are places like that. Yeah, so it's just really interesting that you go in, you see how people are actually working and design a space based on human behavior and not just based off of a blueprint that somebody thought 25 years ago was how people should work today.
Right. It's interesting. When we were doing Workbar, we were also working on Mass Challenge, I think around the same time, which has a completely different philosophy. And like everything there is the same, like for all the
cohorts.
The cohorts and all, like there we separated the floor plate into different neighborhoods, but they all have the exact same character. They all feel like similar to one another. And that's because every year they're going to have a whole different crop of people and different businesses and doing different things, but it needs to be consistent and legible. But so there you have 2 organizations looking at workspace, but with entirely different solutions because of like what drives those organizations and what they're trying to achieve. So
yeah, that's cool. That must have been very interesting for your team. That is probably a little bit rare to be doing like same but different at the same time.
It is, like, so we don't specialize in any one area of work exclusively. Like, we don't just do co-working spaces, right? We do.
You don't do any other co-working spaces.
Of course not. Or office spaces. So we do office space. We do higher ed, as you mentioned, restaurant, hospitality, hotels. And one of the reasons we do that is that a lot of times we're bringing ideas from one area to another and from one project type to another. There's nobody on the team who only does office or only does fitness, right? Because we're firm believers in being able to cross-pollinate ideas and concepts. So it sometimes, may make it slightly less efficient for one project type, but overall it makes us way more creative and coming up with new ideas. So it's not, it's not often that we're doing 2 things that are so similar at the exact same time. And part of that is by design, especially, one designer might be working on 3 different project types at 3 different states of design at any given time. So
Yeah,
That's
Maddie,
very cool.
Vince taught Maddie and I a new word last week, polymath.
Polymath.
Yeah.
I've been trying to get it into casual
Me too.
conversation.
Me too.
It's not
How's
going well,
how's
but
that working?
It's not.
I'm glad that we're here now to say it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were talking last week, and you said that your team is a bunch of polymaths, and Sarah and I were like, oh, we love that.
I was like, so are we. What's polymath?
Yeah, like same. I'm a polymath. No, but it's so, I do think that is a really special part of your team and your organization as a whole. Obviously, it was intentional to be that way, and so you're hiring people that match the culture. But it's so evident. So good job hiring.
Yeah, you have such a good team, and
Really good team.
Your team stays there for like forever.
We're very lucky in
I
our industry.
know.
There's a lot of turn in the architecture industry, and we're really lucky that most people stay 7 years or more.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, and they're so awesome.
It's hiring. It's also we try to cultivate that in people. Like we reward folks who have an interest in more than one design discipline, right? If you want to come in, you just want to do architecture, that's fine, but you got to have at least a basic knowledge of these two other things to exist here.
Right.
But if you really want to develop some expertise, we'll carve out time to train people, to cultivate that, to expose them to other projects so that they can get a wider view of design than just either architecture, interiors, or branding where they may have their historical background.
Right.
That is really cool and unusual across the board, across industries, I would say. You don't hear very often about established companies. In the startup world, I think it's more common out of
Like
sheer
everyone pitches
need.
in, yeah.
Everyone pitches in, you learn a lot of different, but in a industry like architecture, with a really specific set of skills, it's really nice to hear that part of your process is cultivating and growing more interdisciplinary architects.
Yeah. We often find that having that mindset can just automatically lead to really creative solutions. We were doing a project recently for the ART, for the American Repertory Theater, and so we're designing their furniture, right, for this new 85,000 square foot theater project.
That's cool.
But in the process of doing that, they told us, well, hey, we're really trying to create this kind of atmosphere here, right? This is what we want the atmosphere to feel like. Well, that's not really coming through in the architecture, and that's not really something that can come through just in the furniture. So why don't we pose some other options that are slightly architectural, slightly furniture, slightly exhibit design based, to help create more there. There's some landscape architecture.
Cool.
But because we're able to bring a lot of different hats and mindsets to that problem, we were able to make a much richer experience, and they responded really well. We were very, very worried about stepping on the toes of the building architect, who's this world famous firm in London.
Wow.
But they loved it. They were great. They were like, this is great. Let's do this, because we were changing their building around.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing that, again, pulling on more than one area of expertise and sort of one set of entrenched knowledge can really help us come up with some much richer ideas. And that's what, for us, it's all about, is creating an experience that is holistic and consistent, right? From either a website to in person, or from outside the building to inside the building to sitting in the furniture. It all feels like one cohesive thing, and it's more powerful.
That is awesome. It comes through for sure. When does that space open?
Well, it's not till next 2026,
Okay.
fall
Well, stay tuned,
2026,
peeps.
I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's very
It's also
exciting.
nice
That's
from a
cool.
client perspective of having the bench strength on your team, where you have so many talented people that work on Workbar projects, where I can reach out to staff. There are just so many different people that are familiar with the projects and with the brand and with the history, and as just from a bench strength sort of as a client, it's awesome to have
For sure.
a lot of different people.
Yeah,
to connect
that
with.
institutional knowledge is critical for
Yeah.
us, and that comes from working together for so long,
Right.
and doing so many projects, and
Right.
having that consistent flow of new opportunities for people to learn. So
It also helps me whenever I think about what I want, either in the next Workbar or as I'm sort of maybe doing something different in our spaces. I not only have to sort of reason with myself, but I'm okay, I better come up with a reason why Analog will agree to this. and it better be a good one.
That
but
is
it's
true.
important.
Yeah.
It's like,
No, it is.
I not only feel like I have to make sure that I'm like representing Workbar, but I want to represent Analog Studio well, and I want to, it makes me better at my job, because I know that I'm not only answering to myself, but I'm not in a bad way at all, in a very good way. It's just, it makes me think more.
I'm really honored that you give us that
I do.
headspace.
No,
I do.
it's
And these
true.
guys know
Yes,
it. Yeah,
no,
these guys
that's
know
true.
it.
And I'm pointing to Kara right now, who is my better half, or my better 2/3 at this point. But we think about that a lot in new spaces, because again, very early on when I started at Workbar, Kara had been there a few months before me, but we opened the Quincy location and had the Quincy photo shoot, and Brooke was there. And I learned so much just in that day about shooting spaces. And Kara is like a very good art director vibe. And we think a lot about, like, early days. We'd be like, okay, like, what would Brooke say? Like, this.
They literally would say, what would Brooke say?
We're like, okay, we can't, like, this is not, we cannot let Brooke say this. But, like, I think that's really cool, because, like you were saying, it is such a great extension of our team, and allows our team to function in a very similar way.
And we learn from them. Like,
we learn
like
from
you're saying,
them,
we learn from, I mean, we have Analog coming on our photo shoot.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's your space, too. I mean, like, yes, it's Workbar and belongs to Workbar, but at the end of the day, if it turns out crappy, it's like, who did this space? And it's
We're like Analog.
Yeah, they're like, okay.
Well, you guys, more than, like, you know, I've always think about this, like, more than many other clients, or let's say some other clients, especially office clients, like, your space is so intertwined with your success, like, not just in terms of appearance, but like metrics and pro formas, like they have to operate, like, it's part of the business model, like the way
Whenever
the
I
space
send
functions.
you anything, you're like, well, what's the head count? What's the pro forma say?
Well,
or if somebody's like, can we take these seats out? And Vince is like, you got to look at the pro forma. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that is such a cool part of it. I was going to say that earlier, that it's like a good business decision too.
Right.
To work with a company like Analog, who is going to learn your business from another lens that you otherwise wouldn't really learn about. I mean, you're inclined, but not every CEO is.
Right.
You know, so they might hire a firm and be like, do this, this, and this, but somebody else is handling the project. Like,
that does not make any sense to me, right?
Well, I agree, but there are plenty of not hands-on CEOs, so it continues to, it's like a symbiotic relationship.
I mean, I feel like we're making it so Vince is going to be too busy now to do Workbar.
Hurley, bleep out all of this. We're never publishing this episode. All right.
You guys have tenure.
Okay. As long as we are at the top of the list.
Okay. We only have a few more minutes, so we have a couple hard-hitting questions.
All right.
The first is, which Workbar location is your favorite? Pick your favorite child.
There's 11, right?
There's 11.
Yeah.
There's
but
11.
actually, there's 11.
There's many more.
Right.
Like,
there are 11 that are open.
Designed thousands of Workbars at this point.
So there's 11 and then maturity.
Yeah.
So Cambridge will always have a soft spot in my heart, because it was the first one when we dove in. I remember we would have, I don't know if you guys know, we would have meetings with Ken, Richard, Simon, Bill for like 4 hours and go through design things, do the most like the minutia. But you know, those are the things that form the foundation of Workbar, right? Like spending that time.
I remember you talking about it on a project we're talking about right now, and you're like, Richard said to me, put the vestibule on the first floor. I didn't want to, but I did, and it turned out to be the right decision.
Yeah. Slip the last time I'll say Richard was right.
I know. Richard, if you're listening, that was the last time you were right.
Sorry, that's not true. So, and then Back Bay, because it was the first time, like, in Cambridge, we had this idea for the experience design, and we got to like realize a lot of it, meeting the graphics, the architecture, interior design, the furniture, getting that all to click and to really align. But then in Back Bay, we were able to level that up along with and I think we did a little more graphic work then, redesigned the whole graphic suite at that time, and that was the first real. I'd say like 2.0
Yes.
of the experience design and like all the brand standards. But really, honestly, Needham, I feel like
God, home run.
is
I know.
Yeah, it's.
We leveled up there.
I would have never guessed it walking
Yeah.
into that building for the first time that was going to be one of my favorites. But one, that's when we first worked together on the sort of new vision for Workbar,
Right.
3.0, let's say. But then also we got to do the website sort of in conjunction with that and sort of bring everything together so that it felt like, again, a cohesive experience from end to end. The other thing that I have so much pride about in Needham is that we made that floor plan work because it's so deep.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like a bowling alley.
Yeah.
And it's huge. It was an old like Coca-Cola factory or something, right? Or some kind of like
it was. It was.
yeah. And so, putting in the skylights, making that long walkway work and become a feature rather than a problem.
Right.
The long walkway from the cafe out to the windows.
With like all the biophilia
Oh my God,
everywhere.
it's
It's beautiful.
gorgeous.
Oh, yeah. But it was. I don't know. It was a difficult project to figure out in that way because
More ways than one.
sure, the construction of it was
Workbar
extra
behind
special.
the scenes.
So untold stories.
Yeah.
I love it.
Hold on, I do
yeah.
love that, but touch a little bit more on like experience design, experience architect, because I think that's like a huge differentiator for Analog Studio as well, that I don't think a lot of people sort of understand that concept.
Yeah. So Needham is actually a great example because there, we designed the floor plan and we do the sort of normal interior architecture things that architects would do. But then we also specified all the furniture and selected that. And I think that was the first time. Did we change furniture standards at that one? Probably
I don't
not yet.
think so, not yet.
But for us, beyond that goes furniture, but then graphics as well. We updated the graphics suite. At the time, all your typography changed, all the colors changed. Like the whole feeling of the space went from something that was in Back Bay, a little bit darker, a little bit higher saturation in terms of color, a little bit more like intense.
Yeah.
And then Needham, we wanted to feel lighter, and it was ready for a different era of design and co-working spaces and of Workbar.
Yep.
So it, the wood tones went from sort of dark wood, like what we were around here, to light woods, and the colors got a little bit less saturated and lighter in color and a little bit more playful.
Yeah.
We changed a lot of the branding, a lot of the language around at that time too. We debuted a lot of like the new phrases that have become part of Workbar. So, when it comes to experience design, that's tying all those things together, right? So from the moment you walk in, the custom reception desk, that's like a unique thing that we designed for Workbar, and then, walking through the cafe, down the hallway, underneath the trellis and the skylights,
Gorgeous.
and all these things coming together, these custom design pieces, the graphics, the space itself, and then all the way to the point of sitting in your desk. Like it's all one big designed experience, including going on the website and booking a conference room. Right? That all feels consistent. It all feels like Workbar. And that's something that I still like. There are firms that try to do this on some level, but we have yet to see anybody that can execute across all the levels that we do at our scale and here. It's really rewarding to be able to do that.
I mean, it even just brought back that when we were doing our video last year, our commercial, we brought Analog in and Brendan and your team in to...
Yes.
We've done two commercials.
Two commercials at this point.
Right.
But media, we bring Analog Studio in on.
We gotta have it.
Yeah, it's all telling one story. And
10 years ago.
It feels like a long time ago, but Vince and his team were sort of an integral part of that as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. What is the most embarrassing / horrifying / funny thing that has ever happened to you at work?
This gives me anxiety.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
It says so much. You can really tell a lot about a person on how they answer this question, but by
pressure.
what embarrasses somebody. So I forget who told a story answering this question.
Yeah.
And it was to me, I was like, that you were embarrassed by that? That's
Right.
my everyday.
Maddie's like, that happened this morning.
Yeah, So I just love, this is one of my faves. So I'm like, what embarrasses you, Vince Pan?
Yeah.
So it's fun. I read this last night, and then I had a dream about this happening.
Oh no!
So
we dug it up.
early in Analog's history, I want to say this may have been year 1 or something. I don't know how it happened. I just completely forgot about a meeting that I had with a new client. And they called me from the conference room. This was
Pre-Zoom.
Google Meet, pre-Zoom,
Yeah.
everything. Like, hey, where are you? And I was still early in my career and honest and said like, oh, I completely forgot about our meeting.
Yeah.
So you're like, oops.
I was like, I'll be there. But it was in like, where was it? It's like Billerica or something. So I had to
Oh my God.
fly like 40 minutes to get there, and it was awful, but it was like mortifying. It's like that
That's
doesn't
rough.
like happen, but like yeah, ever since then.
That shocks me about you.
Right.
That
That's why it
shocks
Yeah, again, I'm
me
like, oh,
about
that sounds
you.
like a Tuesday.
Like Maddie, if she forgot, I'd
You'd
be like, whatever. It's
yeah,
like
she's.
like,
We
she
never
forgot.
know where she is, what she's doing. No,
But,
but that's
Vince,
legit.
I cannot picture you doing that.
That's like those like high school nightmares that are like
Yeah.
you like forget to go to class or you don't have your schedule. You
Yep.
don't, those
Yeah.
like deep anxiety.
Like a few years ago, I had a nightmare that I had forgotten to like sign up for classes for business school.
Yeah.
And when I woke up, I was like, do I still go to business school?
That stuff lingers.
did I
yeah, I was gonna say it lingers.
graduate?
It
That
just
lingers.
stays.
Yeah.
Wait, do I have a degree? Did I graduate high school? I feel that. That's legit. I can empathize with that one.
I can too.
Yeah.
You can't empathize.
No, I cannot. I'm like, yeah.
Maddie's
No,
like,
but
I missed
get
our meeting this morning.
it. Yeah, like, wasn't I? All right, and the last question that we have for Vince today is, what is a trendy design feature or like a design trend that you see that you are horrified by?
Well, we've already talked about sort of mismatched
Yeah.
moments, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're doing one type of thing and selling one kind of thing or having one kind of experience, and then the space doesn't align with that or the brand doesn't align with that. That's a pet peeve, but it's not a great soundbite or thing to put your finger on. Salvaged wood, rustic wood.
Ooh,
is like, hey, that's
okay.
one, but that's like I think everybody knows that
Yeah.
now.
Yeah,
right?
we're a
Like,
little
come on,
over it,
that's,
yeah.
Another one that really bugs me for some reason, I don't know why, is like is circular pendant lights that are just like a ring of light in a circle.
Oh,
And
agree.
a lot of times they'll get put in a place of like, oh, this is this extra special place. I'm going to put this thing here because this signifies extra special space, but it's not really that like nice gesture.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's that is a really weird like minor pet peeve
But that's
thing.
specific, but I get it.
Yeah.
Because those are like boring. That's like zero.
They're boring, but
creativity.
trying not to be boring, right?
Right,
Like it's like I'm not a
exactly.
straight line, I'm a circle. So like, look at me.
Whoa,
like,
yeah.
look how
That's really
look how
funny.
creative I am. I'm a circle. So
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is.
Right.
But it's like if one of our one of our team members puts out like fake flowers somewhere in our space.
Oh my
I'm like,
God.
Analog Studio spent a lot of time designing this space.
That is so true.
You do not put fake
I
flowers
have heard
out.
you say that
it
many
drives me-
times.
That's
You're like, what is this?
or they better be
This is,
really
like,
good
not-
fakes. They gotta be really good fakes.
They're not,
not.
Vince.
No,
they're
they
not.
never are.
No,
They never
fake
are.
flowers at work.
It's hard.
Yeah, they never are.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much
This
for
is
joining us,
amazing.
Vince. This was so fun. We could talk as usual for hours, but we will probably talk to you like tomorrow.
Yeah,
For the next
afternoon.
Workbar.
Yeah, I know. I loved this. Thank
It's
you,
so
Vince.
fun. All right,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Vince. Talk to you soon.